I recently picked up my first 3D printer, and after a ton of research, I settled on the Bambu Labs P2S, and that's this guy right back here. And at the time, that was the newest 3D printer out. Obviously, since then, they've released a new 3D printer, and that's this guy right here, the X2D. I figure, hey, why not? Let's go dip in my wife's bank account and see what all the fuss is about. Obviously, I'm not a 3D printing expert. I barely had over 100 hours on my P2S when the X2D dropped, but we'll be testing it in the way that I see myself using it. So we'll run multiple multicolor tests, and at the end we'll run a multi-material test. But stick around and see how, as a new 3D printer, things almost took a turn for the worse. So for the first test, we just printed a few simple radius gauges, and between the P2S and the X2D, we kept the same settings and no ironing. So here goes the first set of radius gauges that were printed by the P2S. And I think it did a pretty good job. You know, there's not much to look at here. Simple black PLA with some red PLA lettering. That's from the P2S. And same thing, printed from the X2D. Honestly, quality wise, they're pretty close to the same. Maybe the X2D slightly better, but that's really nitpicking. As far as the numbers go, this kind of comes with an asterisk, but the P2S took 6 minutes and 21 seconds to do its startup calibrations and whatnot, and the X2D took 9 minutes and 19 seconds with an asterisk. I'll come back to that. And as far as total time, the P2S took 28 minutes and 56 seconds, and the X2D actually took more time at 31 minutes and 7 seconds. The asterisk in that was actually my very first print with the X2D, and that 9 minutes and 19 seconds of startup and calibration turned out to not be a thing over the following test that I did. Now the X2D does have to do some extra calibration with nozzle offset, since it has the second nozzle. So it does take longer to start up, but that long of a startup proved to be kind of like a first print, type thing. For our second test, we printed off one of these little Venom guys right here, and this is the Venom from the P2S. I think it did a really good job, very minimal layer lines, and just looks really good. And this is the Venom from the X2D, and once again, did a really good job. So if I had to choose one based on quality, I would hate to even choose one, but I would probably give the slight nod to the X2D. But where it really shined at was the time savings. The P2S took 5 minutes and 49 seconds to start up and calibrate, and the X2D took slightly longer at 7 minutes and 29 seconds, which kind of ended up being more true to its startup time for subsequent tests that I ran. But the overall time it took to print the Venom on the P2S was 6 hours and 3 minutes compared to the X2D, which took 2 hours and 18 minutes to print the same Venom. Obviously, I could have printed 2.5 Venoms for the time frame that it took the P2S to print one, which is a pretty significant savings. But where it really got interesting, this is the waste from the X2D with including the prime tower, 18 grams. And this is the waste from the P2S at 88 grams. So you really got to give it up for the X2D here, because it basically put an ass whooping on the P2S when it comes to multicolor printing. So the last multicolor test I did was a 3-color puzzle piece test. And this is the piece that the P2S did, and it did a really good job. And this is the piece that the X2D did, and it also did a good job, although if you look close enough, you could see some of that black filament through the yellow and the pink. And that's because the X2D kind of went off the rails in mid-print, kind of just started printing in its own, on its own like little path, or, you know, I didn't really understand. A couple layers later, it kind of got back to doing what it was supposed to be doing and finished the print correctly. So as far as print quality goes, this one goes to the P2S, obviously. And as far as time goes, the P2S took 5 minutes and 50 seconds for startup and calibration, and the X2D took 7 minutes and 20 seconds, which was pretty much on par. And total time, the P2S took 1 hour and 2 minutes, and the X2D was 9 minutes faster at 53 minutes. So for a print kind of this small, I thought a 9-minute difference was pretty much on par. All right, so the last test I did was a multi-material test where I printed a PLA piece with PETG supports, and that promptly failed. I walked away, and when it finished and notified me, I came back only to discover that it did not print correctly. For whatever reason, the external spool clogged, and I spent an hour diagnosing, disassembling, removing the clog, putting it back together. And this is where things kind of took a left turn for me. For the X2D, I thought this might be an issue. But once I removed the clog and I made a couple changes to the settings, I was able to successfully print that same piece in PLA with PLA supports with a PETG interface. And when I say that worked wonderfully, no markings where the supports were, it's just butter smooth. So that was a learning experience for me, and I'm sure something that I will do more of using the PETG interface going forward. But just to note a couple things, there was no AI notification, no detection of error. And in that situation, maybe there shouldn't have been. But also, the Bowden extruder, it just doesn't quite feel like the Bambu experience that I expected. It feels a little bit more clunky overall. And if you're not the type of person that wants to really tinker with something, which I kind of feel like is the whole gist behind Bambu, if you don't want to have to tinker with anything at all, maybe the X2D isn't for you. So final thoughts. The P2S is a great 3D printer, but with the X2D only costing an extra $100, it's just really a no-brainer in my opinion. The exhaust fan is about another $20 to $25. And one of the things I discovered in the toolkit for the X2D is you get an extra nozzle, which you did not get with the P2S. I had to go out and spend $22 on an extra nozzle, somewhere around there. So between the exhaust fan and the nozzle, that's $50 right there. So the X2D, if you're not already a P2S owner, the X2D is a no-brainer. If you are a P2S owner, I probably wouldn't suggest selling off your P2S to go purchase the X2D. But if you choose to, you won't be disappointed. I love my P2S. I love the X2D. Now the only thing left to do is convince my wife to let me keep both of them. That's going to do it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.